A message was left for you in a moment when the person connected to your heart could no longer pretend that silence was protecting either of you. They did not write it casually. They did not choose their words while surrounded by noise or distracted by the demands of the day. They waited until the room was still, until the last light beyond the window had faded, and until they could hear the truth moving through their own breathing. Then they placed everything they had been afraid to say into a few trembling lines. But the most important part of that message is not what they wrote first. It is what they almost erased before leaving it behind. You may have sensed something unusual without knowing why. Perhaps an old memory returned while you were doing something ordinary. Perhaps you heard a song you had not heard in months, and one particular line suddenly felt heavier than it once did. Or perhaps there was a brief moment when your surroundings seemed to grow quiet, as though your heart had paused to listen for someone who was not physically there. That moment was not proof of anything supernatural. It was something deeply human, the way two people who have mattered to each other can continue carrying the echoes of unfinished conversations. And somewhere inside that echo, your soulmate was trying to decide whether honesty would bring you closer or finally force them to face what they had lost. They began the message 3 different times. The first version sounded careful. It was polite, controlled, and distant enough to protect them from embarrassment. They wrote that they hoped you were doing well. They said they had been thinking about the past. They almost ended it there, because those words were safe. But safety had already cost them too much. They stared at the screen, reading the sentence again and again, until it began to feel like another locked door between you. Then they deleted every word. The second version carried more emotion, but it also carried blame. They wrote about the moments when they felt unseen, the questions you never answered, and the nights they convinced themselves that your silence meant you did not care. For several minutes, they allowed their disappointment to speak louder than their love. Yet as they looked at those lines, another memory rose inside them, a memory that changed the direction of everything they were about to say. They remembered the day you tried to explain that you were struggling. Maybe you did not use perfect words. Maybe you could not reveal everything. You may have said only that life felt heavy, that you were tired, or that you needed time to understand what was happening inside you. At the time, they heard distance in your voice. They thought you were slowly choosing a future without them. But now, after living through their own season of confusion, they finally understood something they had been unable to understand then. You were not withdrawing because your feelings were empty. You were withdrawing because you did not know how to ask someone to stand beside you while you were still trying to stand on your own. That realization stopped them. The room around them had grown cold. A half-finished drink sat untouched beside their hand. Outside, headlights passed across the wall in brief silver waves, appearing and disappearing like scenes from a life they had once imagined sharing with you. They closed their eyes and remembered your face, not the face you showed everyone else, but the one they saw during unguarded moments. The quiet expression that appeared when you thought no one was watching. The way your smile sometimes arrived a second too late because you were hiding a thought. The way you tried to make other people feel safe even while your own heart was asking for shelter. And for the first time, they asked themselves a painful question: what if they had mistaken your survival for rejection? That question changed the message. They began again, but this time they did not write from pride. They wrote from the place beneath it. The place where love had remained, even after disappointment had covered it. Their hands moved slowly as they admitted something they had never spoken aloud. They had spent months trying to replace what they felt for you with distractions, explanations, and carefully constructed reasons why the connection could never work. They told themselves the timing was wrong. They told themselves too much had happened. They told themselves that mature people know when to let go. But every time they imagined truly letting go, they felt as if they were abandoning a part of themselves that had only ever awakened in your presence. Stay with this story, because the message did not simply say they missed you. Missing you was the easiest truth. The deeper truth was far more vulnerable. They admitted that they had judged you for not loving in the way they expected. They had searched for grand declarations while overlooking the quieter evidence. They remembered how you noticed small changes in their voice. How you remembered details they had forgotten telling you. How you offered comfort without demanding an explanation. How you sometimes stepped back, not because you wanted to disappear, but because you were afraid your presence might create pressure. They had once interpreted your restraint as uncertainty. Now they wondered whether it had been one of the purest forms of care you knew how to offer. That possibility unsettled them because it meant they had not merely misunderstood a situation. They may have misunderstood you. The emotional energy shifted again when they opened an old conversation between you. They did not search for the dramatic moments. They went back to an ordinary day, a day neither of you would have thought important at the time. You had exchanged simple words about weather, errands, and something that had made you laugh. Buried between those unremarkable messages was a sentence you had sent without emphasis: "You don't have to explain everything today. I'm still here." They had read it before, but they had never truly heard it. Now that sentence felt different. It was not a promise that demanded anything from them. It was not a declaration designed to impress. It was patience, offered quietly. And as they looked at those words, they realized they had been waiting for love to announce itself loudly while your love had been sitting beside them in silence. That was when tears finally came. Not dramatic tears. Not the kind seen in movies, accompanied by music and perfect timing. These were quiet, reluctant tears, the kind a person wipes away quickly, even when no one is there to witness them. They were grieving more than the distance between you. They were grieving all the moments when fear had translated your kindness into something suspicious. They were grieving the version of themselves that had wanted certainty so badly that they could not recognize sincerity unless it arrived in the form they expected. But sorrow was not the only feeling in that room. A fragile hope appeared beside it. They began to imagine what might happen if they stopped trying to predict your answer. What if they simply told you the truth and allowed you to decide what it meant? What if the purpose of the message was not to pull you backward into the past, but to finally place honesty where assumptions had been? That thought frightened them more than silence did, because silence allowed them to control the story. Honesty would give you the power to respond or not respond in whatever way your heart chose. They nearly deleted the message again. Their finger hovered over the screen. In that moment, every fear returned. What if you had moved on? What if you had healed by accepting their absence? What if hearing from them reopened something you had worked hard to close? They did not want to become another disturbance in your life. They did not want to arrive with beautiful words only to disappear when courage became inconvenient. So they asked themselves one final question before deciding whether to leave the message for you. Am I reaching out because I feel lonely, or because I am finally ready to love them honestly? The answer did not come immediately. They stood and walked toward the window. The glass reflected their face over the darkness outside. For once, they did not look away from themselves. They remembered every excuse they had made, every conversation they avoided, and every moment when they waited for you to take the risk they were unwilling to take. They saw how often they had asked for emotional bravery while hiding behind their own uncertainty. Then they whispered your name. It sounded different in the empty room. Softer. More real. Not like a memory, but like a truth returning after a long absence. They went back to the message and added a line that frightened them because it removed every place left to hide. I was waiting for you to prove that I mattered, while ignoring all the ways you already had. That line was the beginning of their real confession. They told you that they had not forgotten the last meaningful look you shared. They remembered how your expression changed as if there were words behind your eyes that you could not release. At the time, they assumed you were holding back because you were uncertain about them. Now they believed something else. They believed you were trying not to ask them for a promise they were not ready to make. And this is where the message became more than an apology. Your soulmate revealed that someone had recently spoken about you not cruelly, not dramatically, but with unexpected clarity. It was a person who had observed the two of you during a time when neither of you fully understood what was unfolding. This person said something simple: they never looked peaceful after walking away from you. Your soulmate tried to dismiss the remark. They smiled, changed the subject, and acted as though it had no power. But later, alone, those words returned. They thought about every accomplishment that should have made them happy, every social moment in which they laughed at the right time, and every attempt to create a life that no longer included your name. There had been good moments, certainly. There had been growth. But beneath it all was an unresolved quietness, a sense that they had left one door closed without ever discovering what stood behind it. The person who spoke to them then revealed something else. They said you had once defended your soulmate when they were not present. You had been given the opportunity to describe them with bitterness. You could have told the whole story from the angle of your pain. No one would have blamed you. Yet instead, you said that they were not a bad person. You said they had been afraid. You said that sometimes people leave not because they feel nothing, but because feeling too much exposes the parts of them they have spent a lifetime hiding. Your soulmate did not know you had said this. They sat motionless after hearing it. The revelation disturbed every story they had told themselves about your resentment. They had imagined that you hated them. In some ways, believing that had made the distance easier to bear. If you despised them, then staying away could be framed as respect. But learning that you had protected their humanity even while carrying your own hurt made their silence feel different. It made silence feel like cowardice. So they returned to the message and wrote the words they had almost erased. They confessed that there had been one specific moment when they nearly came back. It was not on a birthday, an anniversary, or any day marked by obvious significance. It happened on an ordinary afternoon when they passed a place connected to you. A familiar street. A cafe. A park bench. A corner where you had once stood together beneath an uncertain sky. They slowed down, and for a few seconds, they imagined turning around, finding you, and saying everything. But they did not. They drove away because they believed they needed one sign, something unmistakable that would guarantee they would not be rejected. Since that day, they had been waiting for certainty. Yet the message now admitted what they finally understood: love does not always offer certainty before courage. Sometimes courage must arrive first. The biggest revelation came near the end. Your soulmate wrote that the special moment was not a magical deadline or a vanishing opportunity controlled by fate. It was the moment in their own life when they had finally become willing to stop hiding. They knew courage could fade if they returned to overthinking. They knew morning might bring back the defenses that darkness had softened. That was why the message felt urgent. Not because you were required to answer, and not because your future depended on one immediate decision, but because they did not want fear to steal another honest moment from either of you. Then they wrote one final paragraph. They said there was something you deserved to know about the last time you saw them. Something they had carried away from that moment and never shared with anyone. It was not merely a feeling. It was a decision they made after turning away from you, a decision that quietly shaped every day that followed. They stared at the paragraph for a long time. Then, instead of finishing it, they saved the message. Because before they could reveal what they decided that day, they needed to confess why they had broken the promise they made to themselves only minutes after leaving you. And the truth behind that broken promise is where everything you believed about your separation begins to change. The unfinished paragraph remained on the screen long after the rest of the message had been written. Every other sentence had found its place, but those final words refused to appear. Your soulmate sat in silence, watching the blinking cursor as though it carried the weight of every choice they had made since the day your paths drifted apart. The room had grown darker, yet they did not reach for the light. Somehow, the honesty they had avoided for so long seemed easier to face in the quiet. Then they whispered the promise they had never told another soul. The day I walked away from you, I promised myself I would never let my heart become this vulnerable again. For a while, they believed they had succeeded. They buried themselves in responsibilities. They smiled when others expected them to smile. They accepted invitations they did not truly enjoy. They convinced themselves that time would erase the connection they once shared with you. Outwardly, life continued. Seasons changed. Familiar places became unfamiliar. Faces came and went. But every time something beautiful happened, an unexpected thought appeared. I wish they could have seen this. Every time life became difficult, another thought quietly followed. I wonder how they would have encouraged me. They realized they had not left you behind. Instead, they had carried an invisible piece of your kindness into every chapter that followed. One evening, while organizing old belongings they had ignored for months, they discovered something that seemed ordinary to anyone else. It was a small keepsake connected to a memory the two of you once shared. Nothing expensive. Nothing dramatic. Yet the moment they held it in their hand, the walls they had built around their heart quietly collapsed. They remembered your laughter. Not the loud laughter shared with crowds, but the gentle laugh that appeared when you felt completely safe. They remembered the way you listened without interrupting. They remembered how you celebrated small victories as though they were miracles. Most of all, they remembered how accepted they had felt in your presence. For the first time, they admitted a truth they had been avoiding. They had spent so much energy searching for certainty that they almost overlooked the rare gift of being deeply understood. That realization brought neither regret nor despair. It brought clarity. The message they left for you was never meant to ask you to erase the past. It was never intended to pressure you into reopening old wounds or pretending difficult moments never happened. Instead, it became something far more meaningful. It became an invitation to honesty. They wanted you to know that if love was ever going to have another chance, it could only be built on truth instead of assumptions, on courage instead of fear, on conversations instead of silence. As these thoughts settled into their heart, another memory quietly surfaced. They remembered the last look you gave them before everything changed. At the time, they interpreted that look as disappointment. Now they understood it differently. It was hope. Not the kind of hope that demanded a perfect ending, but the quiet hope that one day both of you would become brave enough to speak without hiding behind pride. That understanding changed everything. The final words of the message no longer felt impossible to write. With steady hands, they finished the paragraph they had left incomplete. If our paths meet again, I don't want us to meet as strangers pretending we never cared. I want us to meet as two people who finally learned that love grows strongest when honesty arrives before fear. They read the sentence several times. Then they smiled. Not because every question had been answered. Not because every uncertainty had disappeared. But because for the first time in a very long while, their heart felt lighter than their fears. Whether life brings immediate reunion or simply leaves behind a beautiful lesson, they now understand something they once overlooked. Real love is not measured only by how long two people stay together. It is also revealed by how deeply they change one another. Some people enter our lives to teach us confidence. Some teach patience. Some awaken dreams we never knew existed. And every so often, someone leaves behind a love that quietly transforms us into kinder, wiser, and more compassionate human beings. That is the gift your soulmate finally recognized. They no longer wished to remember you through misunderstandings. They chose to remember you through gratitude. Gratitude for every conversation. Every shared smile. Every lesson. Every challenge. Every moment that helped shape the person they are becoming. And perhaps the greatest discovery of all was this. The message they left behind was not only for you. It was also the message they desperately needed to hear themselves. That it is never too late to choose honesty over fear. Never too late to replace assumptions with understanding. Never too late to let compassion speak louder than pride. Whether your own story unfolds exactly as imagined or takes an entirely different path, may you carry that same wisdom into every meaningful relationship that enters your life. May your heart never lose its ability to believe in kindness. May disappointment never steal your capacity to love with wisdom. May patience strengthen you when answers take longer than expected. And may peace accompany you wherever your journey leads. Remember, This story is a work of fictional inspirational storytelling, created to encourage hope, reflection, and the beauty of honest human connection. If these words touched your heart, brought you comfort, or reminded you of the power of forgiveness and genuine love, take a quiet moment to carry that feeling with you. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Until our next journey together, may your days be filled with light, your heart with peace, and your future with beautiful possibilities. May you be blessed with courage when fear whispers, wisdom when uncertainty appears, and love that grows through truth, patience, and grace. Peace be with you, always.